מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא יחסר, בנותש ירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי ישובב, ינחני במגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא יירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן, נגד צורריי, דשנת בשם ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתו בית אדוני לאורך ימים.
As Cantor Shiffman began our service chanting Psalm 23 in the Hebrew, please join me in the recitation of Psalm 23 in the English. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach. The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And we're gathered here today to express our deep, abiding love and to express honor and to say goodbye to a very precious, dear brother, husband, father, grandfather, uncle, and friend, our dear beloved Ed. Our hearts are heavy with grief. Ed was a very special and important part of this family and a dear precious part of this community. For all of us, it's hard to comprehend that he's gone. And yet at the same time, we're grateful that he's at rest, and we are grateful for the gift of his life, the extraordinary gifts of kindness and compassion and justice, and most of all love that he shared with all those whose lives he touched, most especially you, his family. And so we come together today to share memories of that love and of the gift of Ed's life, to draw strength from those memories and from each other, to find comfort and healing and direction during this difficult time. Both of Ed's sons are going to be speaking with us this morning. I'm going to call first upon Alan, and then after Alan, Mark will speak.
Thank you. I'm a very proud son, but I'm a mama's boy first. I want to make sure my mom can hear me. You can hear me, Mom? There you go. I am Alan. I'm the youngest son, and I learned a lot and have a lot in common with my father. The first one is that we are the two youngest Blumenthal boys. We both have an older brother, and I'll start by talking a little bit about my dad's big brother, who is not here physically, but he is with us. My dad is the young brother at 84. So Uncle Bernie is not able to travel, but he did call us and send his regards. They had a very interesting relationship. They weren't really close, but they liked one another. He lived in Texas most of his life. Just to share two quick things. If you saw them together, a few of you here I think have, I know Uncle Paul has, they were really interesting to watch with one another. They called each other Eduardo and Bernardo, and they'd go back and forth. It was really interesting to watch. And actually, I was texting with Uncle Bernie's. I think we're the only ones who call him Bernie, though, he told us, but with his son, and he was reminding me of that. Also, I know we're all very proud of Dad's liberal values and Mom's, and Mark will talk about that a lot more. But just to show you how different they are, Uncle Bernie named his second son Barry for Barry Goldwater in 1984. So clearly something my dad would have never done. So, in going with the theme of being the younger brother, I'm sure Uncle Bernie would say it. I'm sure my brother will say it. I'll say that our kids, both Lisa and Dina, will say it, that as the younger child, and I have my Birch siblings who always talk about birth order, the younger child, there's something that we all do, and we could probably get out of you, but I'll save you. We all get what we want as the younger child. I'm sure everybody would agree to that, and although that's obviously not true or we wouldn't be here today, but what I wanted was to go first. So after you hear the next three speakers, you'll understand why. I'm honored to go first. The first thing, I really want to talk about with my dad is something we don't normally talk about with my dad, but a very, very important part. Family was important. We'll talk about that. And his faith was important, and the temple was important, but epilepsy was a major, major part of who he was, and not something we talk about in society very much. I'm very honored to have my brother-in-law, Michael, who helped me get involved with the Epilepsy Association, and I was able to, one of the central things with my dad is his parents were loving immigrants. I have fond memories of them, but they really overprotected him and were afraid of him doing things, and it really affected his life in so many ways. He didn't have a bar mitzvah because they were afraid he'd have a seizure. They only had, and I can look out here and see so many faces, they only had 10 people at their wedding. It was just immediate family because they were afraid he was going to have a seizure. And my grandparents were very well-meaning, but there were many more things than that. Those are the obvious ones. Growing up with a dad who doesn't drive is a very, how do you explain that? And we really didn't talk about it. So I was very happy that I could get involved with the Epilepsy Foundation and help educate other parents to perhaps not make those mistakes and be more accepting and be able to talk about it openly. If you would have asked Dad, he would have told you, but it never really came up. Luckily, he didn't have a whole lot of seizures, but it did affect his life, and ultimately, I think it brought on his sicknesses at the end of life. Of course, we never know. So next, I want to talk, as I talked a little bit about their wedding, we're so honored to have Uncle Paul here. Uncle Paul introduced my parents. I think others will talk about that in more detail, but we always thank him for that. Actually, he was just here 2 weeks ago with Dad, and Dad loves when Uncle Paul comes to town. And he was, even though Uncle Paul was married to my Aunt Betty, who was very beloved and passed away a few years ago, and Uncle Paul is still very strong and sitting with us in the family and has brought his beautiful new wife to be part of our family. You'll hopefully all meet her later. Uncle Paul, nobody can tell a story like Uncle Paul, but I asked him, he gave me one of the stories, which I'll botch, so you can talk to him about it later, but at their wedding, they decided to buy a new car ahead of time, which was a really big deal. I'm sure both their parents were very involved, and they bought a new Plymouth, and everybody was excited. This beautiful new car, but it was a lemon, as I understand it, and I'm sure they can tell the story a lot better than I believe there was an incident when she was pregnant with Mark, and the Plymouth didn't last too much longer. The details probably aren't that important. I want to thank everybody who has helped us over the last 10 years. It's been very difficult, my mom, and we thank everybody. I want to talk about My dad, the trendsetter. Now, most of you who know wouldn't think that my dad was a trendsetter, but I have all kinds of evidence that have lately gone on. To begin with, I don't know how many of you watch TV and watch the sporting things. The Progressive has an ad campaign, as we knew my dad was coming to an end. By the way, my dad's first job is a Progressive, so I'm assuming that's why they did this. He wasn't there very long. But the whole you buy a car, you start sounding like your dad is clearly about my dad. I mean, I'm sure it could be about all of us, but it's really good. I mean, I think all our dads have different sayings, and the sayings aren't important, but it's really quite incredible that they did an ad campaign right before his death in his honor. But having said that, I have 3 specific things. If you ever went to dinner with us, with our family, and Mark and I would hide under the table when he would do these things at restaurants, we would. Dad loved iced coffee, and he used to terrorize the waiters or the waitresses with, do you know what iced coffee is, and do you know how to make iced coffee? And he thought that was so funny, and we didn't. And, you know, Dad, the trendsetter, now, you know, Starbucks has made iced coffee this huge drink, which, by the way, I think everybody here, at least, maybe we could petition to get them to change it. It should be called the Ed Blumenthal when you get an iced coffee. I know Mark actually had to have iced coffee on the way here. It was the only drink they had at Starbucks on his way home, probably right as Dad was passing away. So clearly that's what that was. The next one is a little more creative, but Dad didn't really like vegetables and salad and all that kind of stuff. So he'd feel obliged to order salad, and he'd say, just give me a half a head of lettuce. I have no idea why he would think that was any good. So clearly the wedge salad, and I would say a plain wedge salad, is the Ed Blumenthal salad. I mean, I don't know, I still can't believe a wedge salad is popular, but that's the Ed Blumenthal salad. And lastly, and this may be a little corny, and I'm sure we could say this about a lot of our parents, but he's my dad, and I'm going to say it about him. He's the starter, the first one to come up with the child-centric parenting. He did it with my mom, of course, but we're talking about Dad right now. And he was all about us. I mean, he was about his work, he was about his faith, but he was all about us. And, you know, a couple things. My dad was not a sports fan. I talk to my kids about this a lot because I'm a big sports fan, and they've become like, where did I get it from? My mom's not a sports fan. But you know what? My dad knew I was a sports fan, and he became a sports fan for me. And I actually thought that's more valuable than all these dads who pass it on. He did it for me. We got Brown season tickets together. We did all kinds of things. So, you know, very, very grateful that he loved me so much. He has 4 fantastic grandchildren that he's very proud of. But Lisa was his grandchild for the first 8 years when he was more with it. And, you know, my memory was so strong that we would let them babysit, and then he would have to sit there and explain to us in great details how great Lisa was. Like, we needed any convincing. But he would go on, and if there's any more proof needed, Lisa is home this week for a couple different reasons, for the whole week, so he made it easier for her, and he passed away while she was home. So if there's any proof needed there. So, but he certainly loved all 3 of them, and Matt was just there, you know, and he was light as, he was completely with it and so excited, and told a whole bunch of people how excited that Matt was there. So with that, I just want to make sure. Now, I was able to tell him a lot over the last few years, how much I loved him, and it was easy to do, but just to state to everybody how proud I am to be his son and how much I loved him.
So, like my dad, I am seldom, if ever, the loudest voice in the room. So if you have trouble hearing me or if I drift, please put up your hand. I will not be offended. I'm so glad that Alan covered what he covered. He did it beautifully, and he covered the side of my dad. There's almost a perfect little yin and yang relationship between what I prepared to his. I will add just one thing. It wasn't Starbucks, it was Panera. It was so perfect. I'm in a hurry, I'm rushing. I don't have time. I need one more shot of caffeine, I need a sandwich. And there's that rest stop near Youngstown. I pull off and they have these screens, right? And it's, oh great, I don't really want to deal with people right now. I can just like punch this in and it'll bring it up. So I get my sandwich and I'm scrolling to try to figure out the coffee drinks. Now there's an urn right there with I could just pull it, but And I get down, and I swear to you, I'm not making this up, there's 10 different coffee drinks, and it's sold out, sold out, sold out, sold out, sold out, sold out, iced coffee. Fine. So, thank you all for honoring my dad by being here. Thank you, Rabbi Weiss, Rabbi Hal, Cantor Schiffman. I'm going to get the part that I knew would be hardest out of the way first, which is like, and it was for Alan as well, all of Dad's caregivers. I don't know, especially Kia Williams, Carolyn Kennedy, Diane, Connie. Don't know if any of you are here. If you're not, I hope you can sense this. Dementia is particularly brutal. And as such, I witnessed the care that they gave. And I would say there are no words, but I wrote them down. I can't say them. It's overwhelming. The dedication, the compassion, the dignity that you brought to unimaginably difficult work. My family and my father were fortunate to have you there. And we're grateful. So, I have 3 stories that I would like to tell. And like my brother, they are about, it's sort of easy between the epilepsy, which sort of defined him at the beginning of his life and throughout his life, and the brutal, long, slow decline of the last 10 years, particularly, even for my children, it's difficult to remember what he was like. It's difficult to remember who he really was, and not to let that get lost in the midst of the rest. So, 3 stories. I also want to thank Don and Sandy McPherson. I don't know if they're here, and Clover Elliott. These are friends of my parents who answered some questions for me in the last 24 hours and who I've borrowed from a little bit and made these stories a little more complete. Story number 1, early 1960s. Alan and I are not yet born. My parents bought a 2-family house on Belmar Road at the top of Superior Hill in East Cleveland. They both worked, but money was pretty tight. So this was a significant purchase. It was a difficult, it was a major sort of financial investment, but easier because they knew that it was a 2-family, so they could, the income from the rent on the 2nd floor was going to be able to cover their mortgage, and as Mom said, it will allow me to start planning to have a family. And it was, in terms of location, kind of perfect for a dad who didn't drive. He was literally 2 blocks from his parents, my grandparents. We were a 15-minute walk from what was then, with the Temple on the Heights and the Mayfield. It was a 15-minute walk from Coventry Village. It was a 3-minute bus ride down to the then trolley, now RTA. So this was a good place to be. Fast forward, July 1966. Alan and I are toddlers. And there are 5 days of rioting and unrest in the predominantly African-American section of Huff in Cleveland, which is less than 4 miles from where we lived. And that sparked a sort of a slow motion crisis in East Cleveland. It was fueled by redlining, pardon the diversion into public policy. It was fueled by this system of maps that designated certain areas as high risk, based mostly on their racial composition. And these are areas where the Federal Home Administration would not provide, would not insure private mortgages as such until it was outlawed by Congress in 1968. Redlining made it effectively impossible to get a conventional mortgage in those predominantly black neighborhoods. As Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his sort of seminal article about the case for reparations, said, black people were viewed as a contagion. And then there was blockbusting, which was even more pernicious, which is a practice in which some unscrupulous lenders and real estate agents conspired to incite white panic. And again, to quote Coates, they would hire a black woman to walk up and down the street with a stroller, or they'd hire someone to call a number in the neighborhood looking for Johnny May. Then they'd cajole whites into selling at low prices, informing them that more blacks who moved in that the more blacks that moved in, the more the value of their homes would decline, so better to sell now. The speculators would take the houses they just bought cheap through block busting and sell them to blacks on contract, which is usually usurious or otherwise unfair. My parents, and then I forgot to thank my mother, who has been memorializing her own life through a series of autobiographical essays that make these stories possible for me to tell because I wasn't there. I was an adult. My parents started to read about the activists in Shaker Heights who'd been working to purposively integrate and introduce neighbors to each other and tamp down the panic. And now I'm quoting from my mom. We wanted to know what we could do to copy what Shaker Heights was doing. Ed became aware of a community organizer who had a storefront office near where he transferred to the trolley on Euclid Avenue. Ed spent time talking to this man and became interested in creating a street club as a way to bring some of this action to our neighborhood. Ed worked hard at it. He walked from house to house on our street, introducing himself and telling people about his plan and how it would benefit the neighborhood. He developed a box of file cards, I still remember this, with names, addresses, and phone numbers of all of our neighbors. We then had regular meetings of our street club in our house with guest speakers from our city government. Of course, he was the street club president. There was at least one club picnic. I was just 4 or 5 years old at the time. I have two very vivid memories. One was Dad's obsessive study of Robert's Rules of Order, because he was going to run that meeting in an orderly way. Second, that he sometimes, frequently, took Alan and me with him as he would walk up and down our street and knock on doors, and we would stand there as he would have these conversations. I think both of those things he must have done out of a sense of anxiety about conversations and meetings that had the potential to be incredibly emotional, divisive, and heated, as the McPhersons remember it, in a slightly different context. He had an inspired campaign strategy, which was that babies sell. And I think that having us there may have been a help. Either way, looking back, I'm still awed by his courage. It was not what he would typically do. He was not a loud person. He was not a big dominant personality. And the fact that he took this action is incredible. Sadly, in the end, the Bellmark Club did not succeed. The institutional momentum behind the block busting was too strong. But activists just like my mom and dad, only stronger in number, achieved some measure of success in Shaker Heights, in Cleveland Heights. And though we also moved about in the mid-'70s, we didn't move far. And in the Cleveland Heights University Heights schools, Alan and I experienced the sort of integration and diversity that my dad dreamed of. Part of Dad's motivation for all of this, as my mother remembers it, was his love of history and politics, and that was certainly something that he gave as a gift to me and influenced my career. But I think this story shows that Dad also understood that politics, like a mitzvah, is most meaningful not as a spectator sport, but as action. He knew that welcoming the stranger wasn't just the symbolism of the Passover Seder, it was an obligation. I think, in short, it reminds me that politics at its best is when ordinary people do extraordinary things, when they take risks, when they step out of their comfort zone, stand up, and do what's right. Story number 2. They get shorter. Quoting my mom, Dad had a difficult time finding his career. He had wanted to be a teacher and discovered literally in school, as he was applying to the education school, that he could not get a teaching license in the state of Ohio because of epilepsy. He tried a few jobs that didn't work out, and he ended up for most of the 60s selling shoes at a succession of department stores in Cleveland, Higbee's, Halley's, Sears. He was good at it, wasn't fulfilling. In 1970, he saw counseling at the Jewish Vocational Center, and he had a very good counselor who recommended that he take the state civil service exam, apply for a job in the civil service, and leave the epilepsy off the application. Dad followed his advice, as Mom tells it. He felt very guilty about it. My dad was not somebody who lied. That just wasn't in his makeup. I have no poker face, neither did he. He passed the test. He was ultimately hired as an interviewer at the Ohio Bureau of Jobs Services, where he worked for 25 years. But there's an interesting twist and a half to this story. And I'm quoting my mom now. Before he was hired, the counselor suggested that Ed make an appointment to see Congressman Louis Stokes. As you know, the longtime African-American congressman represented the East Side. He was our member of Congress. The counselor probably felt that the political pull would help Dad get the state appointment. When Ed came back from seeing the congressman, he couldn't stop laughing. He said Stokes was amazed at the story. He knew about the discrimination that blacks faced in the job market, but he didn't know about the discrimination against epilepsy. Ed's appointment to the Bureau was not a political one, but it didn't hurt to have the congressman's support. Now, we don't know ultimately what role Stokes played in my dad getting that job. Is Clover Elliott in the room? Good friend of mine, the small world story. My mom met a friend at Lifetime at the pool who subsequently moved into their apartment building, who was a longtime supervisor at the Ohio Bureau and knew my dad really well. And she believes that Stokes not only helped, but reminded the obligation that they had a legal obligation to hire citizens with physical disabilities, and that for that reason, perhaps for the one time in his life, epilepsy actually was an assistance. At least we know it was not a barrier. And then, my memory, something called, I was probably the only 10-year-old who had a strong opinion about the Hatch Act. I was one of very few 10-year-olds who knew what the Hatch Act was. It's been in the news lately. In the 1970s, it was a law that forbade any political activity on the part of civil servants. Private, personal, you couldn't give donations. And Dad, who had been this longtime activist, it was more than the block club. He had helped a friend run for the school board. He was an avid follower of the news, stopped. He was going to take that very seriously. And then an election came up a month or two later, and the Democratic Party brought the big bag of literature to our house that it was going to, he was the one who was going to hand it out. He was going to drop it in the doors. He had a dilemma. I don't really remember the conversations. My guess is he said, I can't do this. They said, we don't have anybody else who can. See if you can find somebody. He had an idea. He had Alan and I get the wagon, the little wagon. We put the lid in. We went up and down Belwire, and he would say, okay, in that mail slot, okay, run up to that door. Alan and I were not happy. I don't know if you remember, but it's like, no, Dad, nuh-uh, we're not doing this again. So there are two pieces of the story. One, well, I'll save my thing. He had a way of channeling his idealism that, lacking the outlet of the activism that he had been practicing. I think I now understand he started to channel that idealism both into synagogue and into his job. Here I'm quoting Clover Elliott from her email to me. He worked in the Employment Service Division, helping the unemployed find employment during a very serious time, a time she described as one of racial uprising. He absolutely worked with all nationalities and races, and especially the office that was in the inner city. He was concerned about the individuals that he was working with. He followed through to make sure they got to the job locations, and word got around that Mr. Blumenthal would be the man to see at the Employment Service because he always found employment for people. So he was very well known for the referrals that he made. And again, stressing the sort of racial strife of the time, he referred everyone. He paid no attention to that. He referred everyone so that where there could be an opening. And one little note not to overlook that at OBES, part of his job was to help people learn how to create a resume, help them prepare for an interview. And in that sense, he became the teacher that he had wanted to be. My mom's insight, and a lovely one. While he gave up his overtly political activism, and I said, no, we're not going to help you, a year or two later, I changed my mind. I decided this was cool, and I wasn't going to wait around for my dad to change his mind or this law to change. I just wanted to do it myself. I started dropping literature. I went to the Jimmy Carter headquarters, and that's the rest of my story, which I will leave for another day. But it's another gift from my dad. And finally, story number 3. Fast forward, it's the mid-1990s. My parents get to take their first ever trip to the state of Israel. They go to Old Jaffa, where we have cousins who are artisans, and my dad wanders to the store next door, and he finds this beautiful, it's a bit oversized Star of David on a chain. Tells my mother he wants it, just fine, let's get it. And they get home. If you knew my dad in the last 20 to 25 years, you know that Star of David. He wore it all the time. He wore it day and night, at home, at the synagogue, always over whatever he was wearing. His good friend, the late Rabbi Hecht, used to tease him that he looked like some kind of Greek archbishop with this thing that he wore. After they got back from Israel, Mom asked him, why, you've never been interested in jewelry your whole life, you've never worn any, why? So now I quote my mom. Ed's supervisor had reported to Ed that some individuals, and I'm guessing there weren't many, who came to the Bureau for assistance said they didn't want, quote, the Jew to work with them. They recognized that Ed was Jewish because of his name. So the supervisor said he was going to make him a new name tag that didn't have his last name on it. Dad was a little more than annoyed with this. Wearing the star was Ed's reaction to the prejudice. He said that many of his coworkers wore crosses on chains, so why couldn't he wear a star? And he would never hide the fact that he was Jewish. His supervisor apparently never objected to the star. So, in these stories, you have the essence of my dad. He worked hard. He was always true to his word, always proud of his heritage. He was, in short, an ordinary person who did extraordinary things and lived an extraordinary life. Thank you.
Alan and Mark, what extraordinary reflections you've shared with us that really open up to us Ed's life. Everyone here knew Ed. We all loved Ed. We all knew parts of his life, but you shared with us many things that we did not know, and that reinforce our own ideas about what he stood for and what was important to him, but also added things we never knew. And we already loved your father very much and held him in high esteem, but after you both speak, that esteem is raised. And most especially because you both spoke with such love from the heart in such a beautiful way. And it's clear how much he has touched your lives and been a source of support and comfort to you, to your families. So to each of you and to Helen and Therese, we send our condolences, our prayers that God should send comfort and healing into you, Faye. We pray that God should send you healing and comfort. Also to his brother Bernardo. And to you, his grandchildren, Dina, Sam, Lisa, and Matt. We pray that you always feel his presence with you and that he always brings you comfort and that you're guided by all of these beautiful principles that he lived by. You know, there is a beautiful teaching in the Zohar that I've always loved. It says in the Zohar, Hakol talui b'mazal afilu sefer Torah behechal. Everything depends upon luck, even the Torah in the ark. There are many synagogues that have lots of Torah scrolls. Ours is one of them. We own 20 some odd Torahs. there are 6 at any given time in the main ark in the sanctuary, 2 or 3 in each of the other arks throughout the building. And the Zohar reflects on this and says, you know, a Sefer Torah sitting in the ark never knows whether it's going to be the one that's in the front, that's taken out every Monday and Thursday to read, or every Shabbat, that's always read from and lifted and held and embraced, paraded around the synagogue so everybody can kiss it and show it how much it is loved, or whether it's going to be the Torah up there on the top shelf or in the back that is never taken from the ark and just sits there. Hakol tolui b'mazal, everything depends upon luck. And in many ways, Ed's life was shaped by his fortune, things that were beyond his control. The epilepsy, most of all. A little bit of background. Alan reflected on this some. Ed was born here in Cleveland. His parents came here about 1919 or 1920. His father from Latvia, his mother from what was then, I think, Poland, but now is Belarus. And his father was a delivery truck driver for the Plain Dealer. His mother, Mark, you described her as a Polish June cleaver. She had a thick Yiddish accent, but her house was right out of Home and Garden. Everything was perfect in its place, neat, clean, organized, with that plastic over the couches and chairs that was so typical of that time. My grandmother had that same plastic. I knew exactly what you meant. It was a home that was filled with a great deal of love and nurturing, but also with that overwhelming sense of protection. And that protection grew out of the epilepsy. When Ed was a small child, 5 or 6 years old, he had polio. He fell into a coma for a short time, and after he recovered from the polio, about a year later, that was when he started having the seizures. His mother used to refer to Ed as the sick boy and his brother as the doctor. Epilepsy is a very scary condition, especially so in those days before there was good medication to control it. People didn't understand it and they feared it, and you heard the discrimination that Ed faced as a result of that, and how his mother spoiled him but also sheltered him, keeping him at home to make sure he was safe, not allowing him to engage in sports or outings or to play with other boys or, as you heard, to have a bar mitzvah. And that epilepsy remained a challenge for Ed through much of his life. He was not allowed to enter the education program at Ohio State. When he applied for junior standing, in those days you didn't apply to OSU when you went to first study. You applied for junior standing in your junior year to prepare for your degree. He was denied because you weren't allowed to teach in Ohio if you had epilepsy. And if he couldn't be a student teacher, then he couldn't take the upper division classes, so he could not complete that major. And that led him, on the advice of those with whom he sought counseling, to change his major to history, which was a passionate love of his, and graduate with a liberal arts degree. And then, when he went to work, and he worked for a while at Progressive, which I don't know whether the name of that company has anything to do with his liberal values, but I thought about that. And then after he left Progressive, he had a very hard time finding that next job. You heard that he went at one point for counseling that led him to his career job at the Ohio Bureau of Unemployment Services. But initially, when he was looking for jobs, nobody would hire him. Businesses would not hire somebody who had epilepsy. They treated him like he had the plague, like a persona non grata. And that led him to the shoe sales that he ultimately did, which actually was a tradition in the family, but not what he wanted to do, because he wanted to teach. But you know, everything in life depends upon luck, but it's also what we do with that luck. I don't often quote the first Prime Minister of India, Nehru, at a funeral. But there's a quote of his that I also love very much. He once said, "Predestination is the hand of cards that you are dealt. Free will is the way that you play it." Ed was dealt a hard hand. Epilepsy is physically a challenge, is emotionally difficult to have to grapple with, is still today, was all the more so, much more so, in his years growing up as a child and as a young adult and as a middle-aged adult, a tremendous obstacle. That was fear by other people, that pushed people away from you, that closed doors to opportunities. Ed was dealt a very hard hand, but he played it really well. He played it really well. Epilepsy would in some way define his life, but in other ways he refused to allow it to define his life. And he found the way to graduate college, completing his degree in a field that he loved passionately, to find the jobs that enabled him to support you, Faye, and Alan and Mark, and to raise a family, to find a way ultimately to a career that would allow him to do the teaching that he loved, although in a different setting than he may have first imagined it. Not teaching history in a school, but teaching people how to get and keep jobs and how to lift themselves up out of their situations. Ed transformed his life. And he lived by his values that were so very important to him. And it's those values that I really want to talk about today. The three loves in his life, the three passions that are really what shaped Ed's life, not the epilepsy, that really determined his life direction and his sense of purpose and value, and that were of the utmost significance and importance to him. The first of those loves was family. And Alan and Mark, you already spoke so beautifully of your relationship with your father and the ways in which he touched your lives and inspired and shaped your life. And I know that Helen and Therese, you enjoyed a very close relationship with Ed as well, that he welcomed you into the family as his own children. And Bernie, you're not here, but if you're watching or if you see this later, we're all remembering and thinking about you today and your relationship with your brother. But the relationship that was so deeply important and meaningful to Ed was his relationship with you, Faye. The love of his life partner. The two of you lived out a beautiful love story together. You started as college sweethearts. Your sister, Betty, was married to Paul, Alan referred to earlier as Uncle Paul. And Ed and Paul met in a journalism class at Ohio State University and became friends. And you, Faye, were still in high school at the time. You came down to Columbus to see Betty and Paul and to apply to an occupational therapy program at the university. Betty was so excited at the thought of you coming down and the chance to set you up on a date while you were there. And she asked Paul to find the right guy. And Paul thought of Ed. And boy, he was definitely the right guy. The four of you went out to the racetrack, and you hit it off immediately. You discovered you had a great deal in common with each other. You thought he was kind and considerate and studious. It didn't hurt that he was so good looking. You started dating, and the relationship quickly became serious. But you were determined to finish your degree before marrying, and Ed, he was so smitten with you that he wasn't interested in anybody else. He was willing to wait 4 years. I think he would have waited forever for you. He knew you were the one, the Beshert, that he wanted to share his life with. And boy, it was worth the wait. The two of you were married in April of 1958 at Heights Temple by Rabbi Rosenthal. Together you enjoyed 61 years of marriage, a lifetime, more than half a century in which you shouldered life's burdens but also shared in life's joys and blessings, and together built an incredible home and family and a legacy of love. You love to be together and you love doing everything together. And all of us who knew you could see how deep that love is the two of you share. We could see the way that you walked together, or would hold hands, or talk, smile, laugh, how in sync you were with each other. It's hard for us to think of one of you without the other. This relationship was truly beshert. You were meant for each other. And in fact, you discovered when you started going out that your lives had intersected at many different points along the way without your even realizing it. Among them, when you were infants, your families lived on the same street. And when you were a little older, as a child, you went with your cousin to a school carnival in East Cleveland. And there was this carnival game there where there was a turkey and you had to take a ring, like a hoop. And you had to throw it and try to get it to land around the neck of the live turkey. Can you imagine? I've never seen that carnival game. But this is a true story. And Faye, you looked at that game, you thought to yourself, I can't play that game. I can't. If I won that, how would I ever get that turkey home on the bus? And what would my mother say? But you were intrigued by it, so you were watching and you saw this young boy who took the hoop and threw it just perfectly, and it landed right around the neck of the turkey, and they picked up that turkey and they handed it to him. His mother or his father was there with him, and he took that turkey home. And you thought, boy, how lucky that boy is that he was able to get the ring around the neck of the turkey, and that his parents were there with him, would allow him to do that and would allow him to take this turkey home. And you always remember that story. You never knew who that boy was until many years later, after you were married for some time. You were at a family gathering when Ed's mother leaned over and said, do you remember when Eddie won that turkey? He was the boy. Again and again, your lives kept crossing in your youth. It was as if God kept trying to bring the two of you together. And you were almost there, and then finally in college, it all happened. Beshert, meant for each other. You know, there's a midrash that we often tell at weddings, a teaching that the Baal Shem Tov taught that when our souls enter this world, they enter split, a male half and a female half. They spend the first part of their life searching for the other half to unite together and become one again. And when they unite, the Baal Shem Tov says it causes a light that shines all the way forth to heaven. Then we could see that light when the two of you were together. And the joy you brought each other, you also brought to everyone around you, to your family and to your friends. Ed was also a wonderful father. And Alan, Mark, you've already spoken about that, and it's so deeply apparent in your words. The respect and admiration that you hold for your father, the love that you felt for him, the ways they impacted your lives. And again, he played his hand well. He wasn't allowed to play sports at Rough House when he was young. He didn't know a lot about it, wasn't interested particularly in sports, but as you said, nonetheless, he became a sports fan. He learned it so he could share those experiences with you. But more importantly, as you became older, you realized that he had taught you by his example and by his words the meaning of hard work and responsibility, the importance of kindness and compassion, honesty, the need to engage in social justice, improving the world around you and your community, to being politically engaged, had taught you a deep love and appreciation for Judaism and all that it meant to him and to your mom. so that it has become a significant part of your lives. So Ed was also a wonderful grandfather, a very caring, proud grandfather who took such joy in all of his grandchildren. Lisa, you shared with me your memories before the dementia took so much of him away. You were the grandchild who knew him best. You told me how caring and compassionate he was. Your memories of his coin collection, how you both collected state quarters at the same time. Memories of their babysitting, how they would tell your parents, go out, so that they could watch you. Of sleepovers, of the backyard and the basement that was filled with a maze of stacked up magical games and toys. Of his study that was filled with books that seemed so enormous to you when you were a child, that helped inspire in you and in your brother and your cousins also a deep love of history and learning. He always wanted to know what you were doing, what you were learning in school. And Matt, you shared that you cherish memories of watching CNN with your Zadie, and how you inherited from him a love of news, the importance of politics. And Dina and Sam, he loved you so much and was so very proud of you. Family was a true love for Ed. Ed's second love was his passion for social justice, which you heard about from Mark, and I don't want to repeat all the things that Mark said, but I do want to say that it defined him in so many ways, because he understood what it meant to be discriminated against, and he was determined that others should not face that same discrimination. And I remember in the synagogue too, I regularly saw those values on display. In those years before the dementia, how after I would give a sermon, or Rabbi Hal would give a sermon on any issue of social justice, I could count on Ed to speak with me at Kiddush or during the week, always wanting to comment on it, speaking very passionately, sharing how important it was to him. The Torah teaches us that all human beings are one family descended from the same two people, Adam and Eve, and commands us there should be one law for us and the stranger, and that we are to love and embrace the stranger in our midst, and remember that we were strangers in the land of Egypt, and Ed lived by those words. And Ed's third love was Judaism. His love for synagogue and Torah, for Israel, for Jewish community, and you heard about that star, and everybody here knows that star. We all saw him wearing that. It was his signature piece. And Faye, the two of you were always active in synagogue life and involved in committees and programs, always at services, Friday nights and or Saturday mornings. You would be there on a regular basis. You were involved in sisterhood, Ed in men's club, and Ed was membership chair at Beth Am. You've traveled to Israel several times. Once we did together from the synagogue. Holidays were really important in your home, and family came and gathered together to celebrate at the table. And for years, Ed led the Seder, and he loved to sing at those Seders, as he loved to sing in synagogue. That was the one thing that he was able to do as a child. The one activity his mother permitted him to do was that he was in the Cantors Club at Heights Temple. Cantor Meisels took a liking to him and kind of took him under his wing and loved when he sang in that youth choir. He sang with great passion, even if it was sometimes off-key, just as he did in synagogue his whole life. And I can still see him sitting in the congregation singing Aleinu, and he always sang with such energy. You could see it on his face that he was just almost in rapture. He would love to sing the prayers. He would smile as he sang. In the same way, he loved the seders that you had together, sharing them with family. He was passionate about his love of history. He loved bowling. Mark and Alan, he took you every Saturday when you were young to bowl. You would bowl 2 games with a pause in the middle for exactly 1 soft drink. And we all remember Ed for his wonderful sense of humor, which I think you also reflected on, but I have to mention it was always a little bit off center. Sometimes it would catch you by surprise. Sometimes you had to figure out. You knew he was being funny, but you weren't sure what was funny. But he knew what was funny, and he'd be laughing. And when he laughed, then you laughed. And usually afterward, then I would get it. And usually after I realized that it was like really clever. That's the thing. It wasn't that the joke didn't make sense. It was that it was a more sophisticated joke that you had to think about to understand what he was saying. And I always appreciated that. Everything depends on luck, even the Sefer Torah in the Ark. Egg was dealt a difficult hand in the beginning of life, and he was dealt another difficult hand toward the end of life, 10 years ago, when he first started showing signs of the dementia. And I know that those 10 years have been very difficult for each of you in the family, and Faye especially for you. But through it all, you circled around him and gave him such extraordinary love. You never forgot who he was, what he was like. You kept that alive in your hearts, in sharing memories with each other, and sharing memories with him. And you gave him the utmost dignity and honor to his very last. It was a great gift. And Ed struggled to hold on to those memories. In the beginning, I remember as dementia was starting. And I know it was hard for him to lose pieces of himself. And I know that there's already been a lot of struggle and grieving in these past years leading up to this moment. And we're grateful that Ed is now at rest. No struggle. To be able to be at peace. And the Ed you want to remember is not the Ed of yesterday or a month ago or a year ago, but always remember him at his best, at his most vibrant, when his personality, when his values, when his love was on full display. That Ed, he lives on in each and every one of you. He's still with you. He'll always be with you in your hearts, always be watching over you from heaven. May he always be a source of inspiration to you. And may he live on through you and through all of us as we lift up all that he held dear. May his memory be for a blessing. And we say together, Amen. Please rise for the memorial prayer.
אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמת אליהו בן איציק, שהלך לעולמו, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים ונשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, we pray that you grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure, to the soul of our beloved Ed, who has gone to his eternal home. O merciful one, we pray that he find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May the Lord be his portion. May he rest in peace. And we say together, Amen. Interment will follow at Mount Olive Cemetery, after which the family will receive friends at the home of Therese and Alan Blumenthal, 2397 Allen Boulevard in Beechwood. Today following services and the interment until 8 p.m. Wednesday and Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. Then on Sunday, July 14th, the family will receive at Montefiore from 4 to 6 p.m. Friends who wish may contribute to the B'nai Sherman congregation or to the Faye and Ed Blumenthal Family Fund, care of the Montefiore Foundation.